All right. Can you see it, Fletch? Is everything working?
Yep, everything's working perfect.
Perfect. Okay, great. Awesome. Thanks for having me. So today, like Fletch said, I'll be talking about communicating technical topics to a non-technical audience. Uh, so this is me. Hi, it's nice to meet all of you. My name is Dr. Kate Williams. I'm a content strategist, editor, and writer. I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Tulsa. That's where I earned my degree, my PhD in English language and literature in 2015. I've been writing for the web since about 2009. So I did that through grad school, kind of just to make some extra money on the side. Um, and you do it within grad school, it doesn't pay a whole lot. And so finding ways to make some extra cash was absolutely necessary. And along the way, I discovered that I actually really loved writing for the web and combining my love of researching with academics with web writing. That's kind of how I built my career after academia. And so my specializations are tech, manufacturing, lifestyle, health and wellness, and then general business. And I have a business called People First Content, and we do web writing for companies in those industries and in others. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. There's my site right there, linkedin.com, Williams72. You can just search for me. That's my picture is the profile picture on LinkedIn. So you'll know it's me if you find me. Are you ready to dive in to everything else, Butch?
Yep, I think we're all set.
Cool. Okay. All right, so what is technical writing? This is important to make sure we're all on the same page because it's something that has a lot of definitions and people have different ideas of what it means. Um, so there's a few different definitions we can have for technical writing. About, I don't know, I would say back when I was in college, probably the last one here is what everyone thought of. So giving instructions on how to perform a technical operation or task. So creating processes, creating work instructions, things like that was sort of considered technical writing. And that's still part of it, but it's expanded. That definition has expanded with the rise of digital communications. And so now it also includes writing about technical or specialized topics. So these don't have to be limited just to tech, although of course that's part of it. So software, development, any of that stuff, but also healthcare, anything in the medical field is considered technical writing, finance. So things that really require more than just a base level of understanding. So you really have to get to know definitions, you have to get to know certain industries. That's considered technical writing. And then also communicating using technical tools. So using a website, using social media, using video like we are right now. So all of those can also be considered technical writing. Okay. So what's the purpose of technical writing and communication? And this is something that I teach my students. So that's why I mentioned I'm an adjunct at TU. So I actually teach a technical communication course for engineering. So right now it's engineering and natural science majors. So this topic is particularly relevant right now as I am teaching them before they go off into the workforce. And so one of the main purposes is to present information clearly and concisely. So concise doesn't have to mean super short, it can be long, but not fluffy. You're not necessarily trying to get emotion the way you are with different types of writing. So the next one would be teaching non-specialists how to do things. Often your audience isn't actually other technical people, it's somebody who's outside the field that needs, to gain understanding of how to do something, of how to understand something, um, which is why you have to be accessible to a broader audience of non-experts. And then also helping people find stuff fast. So technical writing isn't like people aren't leisurely looking for it. They want the information, they want it now. And so we'll get into a little bit about how to do that through things like SEO. If you're talking more about processes and documents, then it'd be having an internal architecture that allows for the easy access of that information. A lot of misconceptions about what technical writing and communication are versus that it's a narrow field. It's not, as you can probably tell by now, it's pretty broad. It can be all encompassing. And it doesn't require a technical writing degree. You should definitely have experience, but this is one area where having experience kind of supersedes having a specific degree. My degrees are all in English language and literature, not technical writing, but I've been able to use the experience I have to become a technical writer. Same thing with having degrees in specialty areas. So you don't have to be a doctor to write about medicine. You just have to have the tools and the skills to research that topic. so that you can write about it. People think it's really boring. I know I thought this when I first heard about technical writing. Back when I was in college, it didn't sound fun at all. It sounded like a lot of super boring, mundane processes, and that's not necessarily the case. And same with lacking room for creativity. You can become creative, right? Like we talked about video, infographics, design, all of that is involved in technical communication. So a lot of people only have experience with academic writing, even if regardless of what your college degree is in, however you learn to write in a school setting, even if it was high school, would be kind of fall into that academic area in which you're finding some similarities or you're finding gaps in knowledge. So you're trying to say something that's already been talked about, but in a new way and adding some information. Another similar attention to detail and being precise. So shouldn't be sloppy. It should have you should put the time in to make sure that it is credible and trustworthy, which goes back to research. Number 3 point, that is huge. We'll get into that in a little bit. You can't just, sit down and bust out a technical blog post on a topic you don't really know much about and have it make sense and have it be valuable to the end user. Of course, there's differences. Technical writing for technical mediums, you're dealing with algorithms along with people, so you have to keep that in mind. You also get quick access to data to, determine if something's working or not with academic writing. Especially when I was in PhD, we were writing journals and like journal papers, conference papers. If you're trying to write a book, it can take years for you to get from actually writing it to seeing what people think about it versus if you're posting on the web, you have website content, you can track metrics, see what's working, which is cool. You get to write for a more general audience, and the point isn't necessarily to make an argument, it's just to present facts in a way that makes sense. And finally, getting to the point. You should be concise, going back to that. So, spoiler alert, this presentation is an example of technical communication. So, all right, now we'll get into how to speak tech when you don't know what you're doing. So if you're new to technical writing, if you've been writing for one field and you want to switch to another field, it can feel overwhelming. There's definitely imposter syndrome can creep in. I like to say as long as you know how to research, you can become a technical writer. That's the main thing, is knowing how to get the information you need. All right, so if you're a non-subject matter expert, that's fine. Actually, I'll get clients who ask me, what's your experience writing about this? And if I don't have any, I like to point out how it doesn't really matter if I don't know about that topic, and actually it can be a benefit. Um, I don't know the jargon, so I can't overuse it. I don't know, or I haven't developed bad habits yet about the topic. And I think the big point is I know it's confusing. So if I don't know a lot about the topic, then I can understand where the end user, where the readers might be getting confused. And then next, you get to ask a ton of questions, which is why my first tip is to find a subject matter expert to tell you everything you need to know. So it's okay to be a technical writer and not actually know a lot about the subject at first. People love talking about themselves and their expertise. If you're working with clients, you can ask for recommendations. If you're trying to work on something internally, ask your manager or your supervisor. I'm sure there's somebody in the company or in a partnership who can sit down with you for even a 15-minute, 20-minute conversation, can give you so much information that you can't just find online. You can ask your network, find people on LinkedIn. HERA, Help a Reporter Out, can be a great place to find sources who are outside of your network. It's like a national thing for you to find reputable sources, but they generally want like a credit, so they'll want to be quoted. Just know that as you go forward.
I have a question for you.
Research. Yeah, yeah.
So when working with, let's say, clients and whatnot, and clients could be, like you said, it could be anything. It could be doctors. It could be people creating hardware, like maybe they're making a phone manufacturer or a website creator or something like that. How often do you work directly with the product team of that thing, and you're sort of part of the process and staying up to date as they're creating things versus like, hey, we finished a thing, figure out how it works, like at the very, very end of
Yeah.
it?
I prefer to be in the process if possible. And so, an example, I worked with a startup who was doing an AI tool. So they were doing kind of unique things with AI, and I really needed to understand it because I didn't get it. So I had them walk me through demos, and then I sat in on calls with them when they were having their product meetings. They had monthly product meetings, and I would just kind of sit in and lurk with that to see. That was actually super valuable because salespeople would be in there, and salespeople can be the best source of information when you're trying to understand pain points. Talking about, hey, like people don't understand this, or people wish we could have this. And so it's creating content that's helpful. So I'll talk to the clients, and I prefer to be involved if possible. I mean, for some clients, they don't want you having that level of involvement, in which case they'll just kind of share, what the updates are, and then I'll ask questions as needed to fill in. So it kind of depends on the client's preference. Some of them don't want their writers as involved.
Okay, yeah,
So if
we
you're,
had one of our guys in chat who he's one of my favorite guys to work with, Rainer Sigwald, and he says it's super helpful to have tech writers who aren't experts in his sub area because then explanations get incomprehensible. And I assume that if you're in the thick of it and you are an expert, then you sort of inject your own thoughts about what
Mhm.
it might be instead of trying to figure out like the truth of what, like you become biased a little bit or something like that. But where do you fall on the line of which side of being an expert or not being, or like in the middle? Like which side? You obviously middle, but like where in the middle,
Mhm.
left or right?
It probably depends on the specific tool and the specific thing I'm talking about. And so I don't know, probably more on the left. I feel like some tech writers niche down, and so they're like, okay, I'm only going to write about, say, SaaS, um, software as a service. So they get to know that really, really well. Whereas I prefer to be more on the left of a lot of different topics, if that makes sense. So, and then because of that, I think I can understand where clients are coming from and when new developments happen too, like better understand what the customer and the end user is asking. Um, but it's good to know the jargon too in some ways, and it's good to know like, hey, this is something people internally talk about because sometimes I'll work on internal documents too or internal communications, and so that can be useful. I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yeah, that answers the question. I think I fall the same way. Like, we all have this idea, or this we've all experienced that when a new person comes to the company and they don't know anything about the stuff, that's the perfect time to say, you're fresh as you see these things that most of us have taken for
hmm
granted or forgotten to even document them, whatever the case is. Your fresh eyes is what we want. So people who are already biased by what they think they know about things sometimes are less helpful. I think that's what Rainer's getting at, that type of experience that we've all had. So yeah, you answered it. I think perfect. Thanks.
okay. Cool. So the first one we talked about was primary research. Now this would be secondary research. And this is, I'm thinking of it if you're, working with a client, they've given you a topic. And so obviously starting with Google, but don't just Google it. I really like this GIF that I found about how to vet content on social media. And these are kind of questions to ask. So the same thing is true with looking at websites, right? You're not just taking the first two things on Google and taking them as gospel. You have it validation from multiple sources. Go back and ask the people, either internally or their clients, um, whoever your point of contact is, like, hey, I found this. Is this really how things are? Find videos are great. Look for infographics. I like to take notes, kind of find the things that jump out that are really confusing and be like, okay, what are they trying to say here? And make it more clear, especially if you're trying to compete with competitors. Like if you can find a way to say something, even if other people are talking about it, but you can say it in a way that makes more sense, then that'll help with search and that'll help with, the end user. So they actually get the benefit they're looking for. And then accuracy over everything, right? So got to focus on understanding the fundamentals. We'll get into SEO in a little bit and worry about adding complexity to get to the topic. And then don't say things with authority unless you are certain they are true. Don't be like Jen, believing that box is the internet. All right, so all of this, uh, there's a lot of upfront work to technical writing, and yet readers only spend an average of 37 seconds reading a blog post, which can feel defeating after you've put all that time and effort into it. But that's kind of just what you need to know. And that's why a lot of people niche down because it's so time consuming to get to know a technical topic. You don't want to be doing it for 1,000 different, you know, areas. Um, okay. So formatting technical content is a huge part of making it accessible for a non-technical audience. The first would be, figuring out who your audience actually is. And if you're working with clients, sometimes they're not sure, or they may have multiple audiences. And so I really like to drill down into, okay, but for this piece of topic, who are you envisioning as your audience? And you can go back to basics with who, what, where, when, why, and how. So who is the piece of content intended for? What's their baseline knowledge? Where are they going to be reading it? So desktop, mobile, tablet, somewhere else. If it's a manual, are they going to be in field working on it? What's the actual context of where they're going to be? When are they going to be reading it? And then why and how are they going to use this information? So do an example of oh, sorry. I thought I had closed all of my stuff. Sorry about that. So this is just an article that we wrote. So I was going to do it as an example of an audience analysis for. Oh no, I lost. All right. Uh, all right. I lost how to present it. That's okay. So this backlinks guide. So who is the audience? Business owners who need more organic traffic. What's their baseline knowledge? Probably minimal to zero. They maybe have heard of backlinks. They've probably found this through some other SEO research they've been doing. Our analytics tell us that where they're reading is desktop, when they're probably in the early stage of their business, right? They have a blog, no domain authority, trying to figure out how to build that, why, to learn how to get backlinks and improve SEO, and then how are they going to use this information, hopefully to go out and create content that gets more backlinks. Of course, for us, hopefully to hire us to, help them create that content, but at the very least, we want them to know exactly what to do. You always want them walking away knowing what to do. That's what the call to action should be. Okay, here's something that you can do with all of the stuff you've read.
On one big audience that comes to my mind is, like, for example, CNET. CNET writes all kinds of articles for new technologies and things like that I read sometimes. So they're thinking about their audience as people like me who are consumers and whatnot. Thinking about a different audience though, like for some of my clients that have, they build software, but they build software that's only used by their clients. So, for example, they might sell their software and Microsoft uses it internally, for example, or some other company, Pepsi or whatever, uses it internally. They use software. So the audience that the technical writers are writing for are for internal clients. So it doesn't go like
Mm-hmm.
publicly. What's your experience or your thoughts on, are there any differences when you're writing for internal customers, for example, versus the general public or something like that?
Yeah, I think for internal, I mean, that's great if you can write for internal customers because you probably can get a better feel for what they need, what their pain points are. You probably can get a little more technical as well if they're really familiar with it. Get more into the details too. There's probably fewer or less generic things that you're talking about. If they're like, yeah, I'm already using the software, I'm already sold on it. Like, I just need to know this bit. So I think there's definitely a difference in writing general versus specific content. Um, and it can be helpful to, I think you can get more data points about, hey, here's what they want, and we can get their feedback on what's useful and what's not.
Nice. All right. Gotcha.
Okay. And then step two, you're making it findable. So you want people can't read your amazing technical writing, whether it's internal, external, if they can't find it. So for technical documents, manuals, process reports, things like that, then either follow internal protocols or create them. I think, I mentioned earlier, someone coming into the company, if there's a technical writer coming in and it's like, hey, I don't know where all this stuff is, that's probably a sign that there isn't a great architecture. So that can be, technical writer probably shouldn't be solely creating it, but working together with the right people inside to make sure people can actually find the things that they need. That prevents work from being duplicated and just saves everybody time. In my world, it's more SEO. So figure out how to optimize blog posts and website content. Um, for technical writing, you want to do that for any kind of blog posts. I'm going to just give examples of how that works. And what we mean by making it findable and how to get it in front of the right people. So not necessarily in front of more people, just the right people. And so first one would be keywords versus keyword phrases. Anyone who's familiar with any kind of digital writing has probably heard of keywords. So these are examples from moz.com. There's a free option available if you're getting into technical writing. It's, I think, 10 searches per email address. So just sign up for multiple email addresses if you want. So say SaaS is the topic that you got a client in SaaS and you want to start writing for them. So I would start with a general search, see what pops up. Um, as you can see though, what pops up for SaaS, 45,250 is a monthly volume, huge volume, but that's probably going to be really hard to rank for because there's so much volume, there's so many people out there trying to write for those products, or write for that keyword. So I narrowed down by questions. Two reasons for this. One, the search volume decreases, as you can see here. Um, Two, you can see similar keywords. So here under what is SaaS, you see what is cloud computing. So it's like, oh, hey, that's another way people are talking about this. That's something else I should be talking about. And then three, your chances to rank increase. So this here is the people also ask, and it pops up at the top of Google. So if you search what is SaaS software, what is SaaS? So Salesforce pops up first. After that, though, these people also ask, those aren't ranked. So those are just blog websites that have answered the question and they're at the top of the Google page. So you can be ahead of ranking content. And so you get more visibility, you answer people's questions, more traffic to your website. So questions are a great way to go for keyword phrases. And then the last thing to know, lower search volume doesn't necessarily mean less interest, it means more focused interest. So these were towards the bottom of the list I got from Oz. But you can see how they're a lot more specific. So what is a SaaS subscription model? Um, what are some examples of SaaS? Are apps SaaS? So these are really specific questions that can lead to higher conversions, clicks, and shares because it's not quite so general. We could do a whole thing on SEO. That's just a very quick overview of it. The main point is figure out how to make sure people can see your technical writing. And then step three, so now we're at the part of actually getting to write the content. Here are just some generalized tips. Remember that the people reading it are really busy and they're going to scan, not because they're not intelligent, but just because that's how people read these days. Especially at first, people might spend just a few seconds scanning to see if it's actually worth their time before going back and deciding to read the whole thing and spending, 5 or 7 minutes reading it. So these are a few key tips. Short paragraphs, one sentence paragraphs are fine, especially if it's a really technical topic. Having that white space helps to break it up, gives people's eyes a break. Non-jargon language. So especially if you're speaking to a non-technical audience, you want to talk like however you would understand it. So use analogies. That could be great. If we go, I don't want to go back because I'm gonna get out of my slides. But the link building article, the link building article I had before had a really good analogy to explain, what happens if someone's referring traffic somewhere else instead of your website. Give direct answers. I'll show an example of this in a second. Don't bury the lead. So here's an example for us with the question of, there it is. What is white label content? And so this is something we're ranking for right now on page one. We're still not number one, but page one. But you can see the question, what is white label content? And we just get right into the point, right? I'm sure everyone has searched for things and the first three paragraphs are talking about something totally different. And you're like, well, I just want the answer. So give people the answer that they're looking for when you're writing technical content. Right. Okay. Step four, visuals can really help break out content, especially if it's long. Um, People scan articles and process visuals faster than text. So it can be, you can tell a story in an image that would take you a couple paragraphs to do in text. So it can be charts, infographics, videos, great. You can use Canva, that's what we used. That's what my designer used to make this. Tips for using visuals. There's other tools out there to use. So again, getting into design is part of technical writing. So being a designer is absolutely essential for technical writing. You don't have to do both. If you're a writer, you can find a designer. You don't have to do both, but it helps if you like doing both of them. All right, and then finally, polish, read it out loud, revise it. I like to say draft like nobody's watching, which is what I do. I don't recommend sharing Google Docs for your drafts because then you'll feel like, ooh, I can't say this, I can't say this. No, just like get it all out in whatever way makes sense to you. but then go back and revise it like it's going to be read by everyone in the whole world. So that means reading it out loud to find mistakes. Often we don't catch our brains can't keep up with our eyes, and so we miss things. If you read it out loud, you're forced to slow down or use a tool to read it out loud to you. Send it to somebody who can help you find errors or gaps. If you are working with a subject matter expert, like share it with them. Hey, is this accurate? Did I get everything right? Any inaccuracies here? Send it to an editor, send it to somebody who is also non-technical to see if it makes sense. I love Grammarly as an editing tool, and so I would recommend using that for something else. And then walk away, go do something else, let it sit overnight, and then come back to it again, fresh eyes, and look it over before you submit it. Because technical writing does need to be so precise, um, I don't recommend doing it in a hurry. It's really, you can make a lot of errors. And when you're talking about things like healthcare, even, or medical or finance, especially that really impact people's lives, you want to make sure everything is accurate and fact checked and written in a way that isn't going to cause somebody to go take an action that might not be best for them. I've got some tools here for improving your writing. I use all of these. Grammarly, again, spell check on steroids is what I call it. We use the pro version. That's in addition to actually finding typos and spelling errors and grammar errors, it'll tell you if you're using words too much. Like, hey, you keep repeating this word. How about you say it this way? It'll help you find passive voice versus, tell you, hey, here's a way to make an active voice. It'll just help you rewrite it. That is our secret weapon sometimes, especially if you're writing about the same topics over and over again. It can be helpful to say like, okay, here's a way I can make this more interesting. Hemingway app helps you write concisely. I really like this one. These are all free tools also. There's paid versions, I think, for all of them. Maybe not. There's definitely free versions though. So you can just copy paste what you've written into the Hemingway app. It's a desktop thing. And then it'll go through and tell you all the ways that you can make it more concise and more readable to an audience. I love what Uber suggests for SEO insights and topic ideas. I use thesource.com way more than I should admit, especially if you're writing about like, how do I say this a different way? That could just be really helpful. And then Writer is an AI tool. So AI content tools are absolutely emerging. We use it when we're writing on topics um, that have a lot of research out there. Because one of the things Writer does is it can like quickly go through the internet and find a whole bunch of articles on the specific, software or specific thing we're writing about, and then we can kind of sift through and figure out what points we want to make. So I don't recommend relying on it like solely. I don't think AI content is high quality content on its own, but it can be really useful for getting ideas and just kind of seeing what's out there, and it can save some time in the research process. And then that is it. So now you know the basics. Like I said, that was just a really brief overview. There's so much more to it. I'm writing about technical topics for a non-technical audience. My key takeaways would be you don't need to be an expert in the field. You just have to be an expert in knowing how to research and to find information and put it into context and into writing in a simple way. So that's my big main takeaway. So open for questions if anyone has them. There's my contact information if you want to reach out.
Yeah, feel free to put questions in the chat, guys. I'm going to throw something at you.
Okay.
For a client, for like a company I'm working with, who, sorry, they need a technical writer. As far as I'm concerned, they need somebody to write up the documentation about what their systems do and send it over to internal clients. So like sort of like I was talking about before, internal clients
Mm-hmm.
or like internal documentation. Do you have a certain way to present to them like this is the value of having a technical writer instead of just having your business team who they're businessy and whatnot, or their product team or whatever, just writing up their release notes? Do you have like a very short, succinct way of saying this is the type of value that you get? Maybe I don't know if you have numbers or not, value with numbers or anything like that. I'm just curious if you have anything to say in a short way.
Okay, I'll try to make it short. I might talk through it a little bit, but we could shorten it as needed. So I would say a main reason to have a writer do something like that versus somebody who's not a writer is writers know how to organize things and writers understand what the end users want. And so they can take, as a writer, I can take the information that whoever else is putting it together gives me, and I can figure out how to put it in a succinct, formatted way that gets the information across, and saves the most amount of time, I'd say, for the client. And so I think that'd be the biggest takeaway for me is like, hey, if we can get it to them, and I don't know if there's back and forth between them. I'd imagine if it's presented in a way that's confusing, it might be like, hey, well now, there's all this back and forth, we have to have calls, or the client doesn't understand and they do something that makes a mistake and that costs them money, that costs us money. So I don't know. I'd have to know more specifics if I could get into that. But yeah, I guess the short, succinct answer would be writers can organize it in a way that makes sense for the clients and minimizes, confusion and misunderstanding.
Cool. Yeah. I'm gonna tell you, all the watchers right now. I'm going to post a link to the actual Google Meet that we're in right now. Oh wait, actually, a question just came across. Perfect. What's your preferred way to deal with a situation where the technical feedback on a draft is, this is sort of true in practice, but it's more complicated because blah blah blah.
Mhm. Um, I mean, if that's the only feedback I got, I'd probably need to have a conversation with them to be like, okay, so what's complicated about it? And that sounds like it should be its own, if this was say a blog post or an article, that probably should be its own section. Like, X is true, but there are some times when it's not. Here's when, and then kind of create a whole separate section about that, or if it's on their website, whatever type of content it is. But I don't like to accept those generalizations. I'd like to dig deeper to say, okay, well, what are some examples of when that's not true? How often does that happen? What are the specific circumstances that can happen? Basically, like what, like try to get it out of the client like as much as possible that the end user needs to know. I
But
think
to
it's
flip it
helpful.
the other direction also, because that makes sense. I think asking it from point A to point B, but point B to point A, if you're the one writing up a draft and you've written it and it looks great and everything, but what you've written, it sounds great and it's true in practice, but you've written something that's actually, it's more complicated. So the tech team comes back to you and says, yeah, what you said is true, but it's actually more complicated than that.
Hmm.
Then how do you go about, I guess, extracting that information from them?
Um, yeah, I mean, probably a phone call. Like I would have to get that information from them, even if I was like, oh, I love this draft. Like I don't think as a writer, like as a writer, you have to take feedback. You can't take it personally. So be like, okay, that's great. I'm happy that you're happy with this, but like, okay, so this isn't going to be helpful then if it's not technically true most of the time. And so, um, I'd have to figure out, the best means of communication to figure out from them what that is. I think I don't like
Nice.
to, I wouldn't want to send something out there that's not actually helpful for the end user.
Yep. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and open up this chat so others can join in. So I'm going to post this in the link, and I'm going to stop the stream.